could put it back in.
I'll put it back. I'll put it back. But let's leave it here for the moment.
We're going to start loading people in. That'll probably take us.
No, I can ring the bell.
Yeah.
Oh, you're ringing the bell. Oh, no, I'm going to have them ring the bell. Oh, okay. No, Kevin.
Thank you, sir.
There you go.
Oh. Cell phone. Oh. Yeah, I'm just. Oh, sorry. Yeah, can we chat about why
No drinks. The speakers are on this road. Sorry.
He wants to be. He stayed out to see Sean stuff. I told him to put it back in.
Close them on wait. When you want me to start, close them up. King game in the middle of introducing the lecture at the club. I can't talk. Yes, I'm right. That's fine. Well played. Ready? Felix? You ready for me to start hushing?
If you stand up too close to the screen,
Yeah, okay. I'm going to move this here.
yes. Because then you look like just being abducted.
How about this, okay? Is it ready? I'll try to remember that back. Good evening, everyone. Good evening, good evening, good evening. Welcome, welcome. By the way, for those of you who I have not already had a chance to say hello to, my name is Richard Gallaudet. I'm the current president of the Explorers Club, and I welcome all of you to the Explorers Club. My first question for all of you is who's here at the club for their first time? I mean, do we have any newbies in the room for the Explorers Club? So half the audience have been here for the first time. So first of all, welcome and thank you all for coming. You know, the club has been around for about 120 years. We think that in that 120 years, any explorer worth their salt has been here in this club. And most all the greatest explorers have actually stood at this lectern to give lectures. Everybody from the climbers who first ascended Mount Everest to Don Walsh, the people that went down to the bottom of the deepest place in the ocean, to Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin, the first people on the moon. Basically, any historic grade of exploration has been here at this lectern. So I thank you all for coming tonight, and I hope you also enjoyed the chance to stand here. We consider one of these hallowed lecterns to present to this evening. I would also argue that in that 120 years, you know, our members, there are a lot of great explorers in time, and in the last 120 years, we have what we call our famous firsts. Our members were the first to the North Pole, the first to the South Pole, the first to the top of Everest, the first to the deepest point in the ocean, the Mariana Trench. And all the Apollo astronauts, the first people on the surface of the moon, were also all members of this club. And I think there have been kind of three grand eras of this club. The first era being the heroic age, where people were pushing the dragons off the maps of the Earth, the final dragons off. The second era was people bringing back the scientific data to understand the living organisms, this living planet that we have, and how to understand it, how to protect it, what's important to protect, and strategies to do that. And I think the most current era of this club is people out just trying to fix things. People actually going to, coral is being bleached, and I can't tell you how proud I am of all the people going out there and just trying to fix it. And not just trying to fix it as an individual, but trying to fix it at scale. And we here at the club love supporting explorers that are still trying to plant flags. There's still unexplored places. Explorers that are trying to bring back that data. There's still a lot of people doing that. But at least for me, I'm particularly excited to be supporting the people who are out there just trying to fix these profound problems the planet has. But let me turn now to tonight. So tonight is a very interesting, it's a packed house. This is sold out. So this is clearly a super popular topic, and it's one that I also personally wanted to be a part of from multiple angles. And the reason why I wanted to be a part of this is, first of all, I'm a pretty experienced explorer myself. I've been in the North Pole, I've been to the South Pole, I've ordered the Earth in space, I've been down at the bottom of the deepest place there is, the Mariana Trench, and I started climbing high mountains. I summited with my children Mount Kilimanjaro just a couple months ago. And through my time with this organization, I have, and beyond, I have kind of believed, like I think all of you are, that we live in an amazing universe, and an amazing planet. And one of the most amazing things about it is how there are things that we do not understand, how there are things that clearly violate our perception of what is practically true and practically possible. And every time we think we found one answer, we find more questions instead of all the answers. And there's still so much more to know. And even for me as an astronaut and other aspects, I am a believer that there is life beyond this planet. I think there's reasonable odds there's life still within our solar system on some water-based planets. But I want to poll this audience here at the beginning, and I'd be interested with maybe we'll poll at the end also. How many people in this room right now believe that life that did not begin on this planet has likely visited this planet? How many people believe aliens have visited the Earth? Okay, and just to be fair, how many have I asked the question correctly? Oh, okay. Oh, that was fair enough. Fair enough. Okay, that was how many people think. How many people know that aliens have visited this planet? Okay. Okay. And so I'm going to call that. If we have 100 and some odd people in the room, 5% say they know, 25% say they likely. So now let's go to the other side of the coin. How many people think that it's unlikely that life that originated beyond this planet has visited this planet? Ooh, smaller number, but still I'd call that 10%. And how many people know that no life that started beyond this planet has ever visited this planet? 1. Okay. And so, and by the way, I'm not sure how that one person got to the I know for a fact it didn't happen. So, there you go, because he's not from this planet. So that would be a way to know. But before we kick it off, pardon me for taking a little presidential prerogative, but I want to tell you a personal story about UFOs and my family. And it actually starts with a magic trick. It starts with this little magic trick that I had outside, and I was actually showing some people outside. This is a little cube, and this cube has symbols on it, and the symbols that are on the sides of this cube look like this. These are what are commonly referred to as ESP cards: a circle, a plus sign, a squiggly lines, a square, and a star. And because my cube had 6 sides, I put an infinity sign on the 6th side. And I was showing this magic trick where I could do ESP to my dad at an astronaut function. And my dad said, "Oh, that's really great. Whatever you do, don't show that to Ed Mitchell," another astronaut. And at that moment, Ed Mitchell walks up and goes, "What are you doing?" And I still have that cube in my hand. And so, Ed's looking at this. I look at my dad. If you look back at Ed, and he goes, "Eh." And so I do this magic trick for Ed Mitchell. And he goes, "Oh, I know how you did it." And I'm going like, "Oh, how did I do it?" And he said, "It's quantum resonance." And I said, "Well, it could be because I'm cheating and I'm a magician." He said, No, it's quantum resonance. I have a friend who's really good at it. You might even be better." And I said, No, I'm a magician. I'm cheating. And he went, "No, it's quantum resonance." And I was like, "Okay, whatever. It's quantum resonance." And then I had to Google Ed Mitchell to go like, why is this guy not willing to believe me that I'm doing a magic trick? And it turns out Ed Mitchell did a magic trick on the way to the moon and back. And I know you can't see this, but I'll have it outside. It was outside before. This is Ed Mitchell's personal logbook from his trip to the moon and back. And in this logbook, every hour on the hour, he wrote down one of the symbols on that card. And he had a friend on Earth who had convinced him that they had ESP together. And he wrote down one of those symbols every hour on the hour. They did it about 100 times. And there's 5 symbols. You'd expect to be correct about 20% of the time. And they were correct about 17 out of 100 times, which is well within a statistical bell curve. But Ed was convinced that the speed or distance to the moon somehow depressed the probability of them being correct. And he spent the rest of his life he founded and funded something called the Neontic Studies Institute in Florida, trying to prove that ESP was real, when in my mind, he had some dumbass friend who was a magician that convinced him that they had the ESP together, and he went to his grave believing in ESP. But only then did I also find out he believed in UFOs. And that related to another story that involves my dad. So my dad's first flight to space was on Skylab, and his first job right after launch was to they turned the capsule around to look for debris from the separation that might have followed them into space. And sure enough, he saw what might be like an explosive bolt fragment tumbling and getting brighter, dimmer, brighter, dimmer. And my dad took out a long lens camera and took a shaky camera photo of this. And it's really a single object that is getting brighter and dimmer, but it's kind of moving in the frame over long exposure, so it makes this kind of skid mark that's brighter and dimmer. And then my dad who was Spock-like, I could never say that's right in life because that's a direction. I had to say that's correct. And my dad was never emotional, never loving, never angry, which was a problem. But thank you. But my dad got on the radio, and very logically and rationally, he called down to NASA and said, "Hey, NASA, there's an unidentified flying object behind Skylab." And my dad thinks he's just being accurate in his communication. However, it's on an open line. And so this is what comes out in the newspaper the next day. UFOs spied on Skylab and many other space shots, as told by, 26 astronauts confirm that UFOs are real. And this was like my dad's bane in life. He was so pissed off about this. And while I knew that, again, he's never emotional, so pissed off is relative. And until I was going to space myself, and I was taking a ham radio rig up, and I went to my dad as a joke, and I said, "Hey, Dad, wouldn't it be funny if I clicked on the radio and said, 'Look, there it is behind us, a UFO.'" And my dad got angry at me. He was furious. He was, "Richard, don't you dare do that. You will set back science by a decade or more." I was like, "I'm sorry, Dad. I'm sorry. I won't do it." And I didn't do it. Should have, but I didn't do it. But the reason I tell these stories, and I know that tonight is really a scientific discussion of this subject matter, which, by the way, I love. I asked about the discussion before I wanted to come here and have this. So I know that's where we're headed with this. I'm very excited to hear about it. I want to say in advance, I am a skeptic in the sense of I believe the Drake equation implies life is out there but not nearby. But I'm very fascinated to hear what you all have to say tonight, and we'll see how many minds are changed or facilitated for the night. But what I want to do now is introduce our introducer for the evening and our MC for the evening, Hubert Pedroli. He himself has had a career in finance for many years in the United States, but educated or at least born in France. About 50 years ago, he wrote I don't know how many books you've written, but he wrote a book on UFOs and the study of the phenomenon of UFOs. So he's a long-term studier of this subject matter. And Hubert, if you would like to come up and help introduce our speakers and get the evening started. So thank you. Thanks. Oh, yeah, good to see you for you.
Sorry. Okay, well, it's a little difficult act to follow, but hello, everyone. Thank you, Richard, for your introduction. Oh, microphone. Yep. It's truly a privilege to be here tonight. Then we do realize, even to this day, that the UFO topic remains controversial, and therefore I must express my gratitude to the Explorers Club for hosting the event and letting us explore together this fascinating and mysterious phenomenon. My sincere thanks go to the team of Felix, Kevin, Milbury, and Will for their hard work in making this happen. Thank you. So, indeed, for decades, despite ever-growing interest from the public, the UFO enigma had been met with, let's call it, great skepticism from the scientific community, an attitude that mirrored the US government's own repeated denials that UFOs even existed. That was the situation. But thankfully, all that changed on December 17, 2017, when a remarkable article was published on the front page of the New York Times, an article that changed the course of UFO history. It revealed that the Department of Defense had a secret program investing UFOs, now officially renamed unidentified anomalous phenomenon, or UAP. Together with the article, dramatic videos of these objects taken by Navy fighter pilots were released, videos that have been seen by countless people around the world since. Now, a lot has happened in the last 7 years since that pivotal article, and tonight, to bring us up to speed on these developments, we are very fortunate and grateful to have with us two of the most credible and knowledgeable experts in the topic, namely investigative journalist Leslie Kean and retired U.S. Navy Rear Admiral Tim Gallaudet. Leslie Kean is a co-author of that game-changing 2017 New York Times article and of a series of other Times articles on UFOs written with her journalism partner and author, Ralph Blumenthal. And I'm happy to say that Ralph is here tonight in the audience. And thank you for being here, Ralph. Leslie is also the author of the New York Times bestseller book, UFOs, Generals, Pilots, and Government Officials Go on the Record. Her 20-plus years, almost I think 24, years of reporting on UFOs were also profiled in a compelling feature story in The New Yorker in 2021. I really highly recommend reading this article. It's really compelling. More recently, working with Breakthrough Films, she just completed season 2 of the documentary series UFOs Investigating the Unknown for National Geographic, and that will be released this coming January of 2025. So all I can say is, Leslie, thank you for all your contributions to the field. I think that it's fair to say that without you, we probably wouldn't be here tonight. Thank you. This evening, we're also honored to have with us retired U.S. Navy Rear Admiral and Explorers Club member, Tim Gallaudet. During his distinguished career in government, Tim has served as Administrator of the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, Acting Undersecretary of Commerce, Oceanographer of the U.S. Navy, and Superintendent of the U.S. Naval Observatory. An impressive resume, to say the least. In recent years, Tim has become an outspoken advocate for UFO/UAP transparency, with a focus on UAP that are actually operating under the oceans. They are also known as unidentified submerged objects, or USOs. Just last week, a week ago, Tim was in Washington, D.C., testifying at a open congressional hearing on this very topic. So I think, yes, and if you haven't seen, by the way, this congressional hearing on TV, I recommend watching the replays. They're very, very interesting. So I think now it's time to start with the presentations. Leslie and Tim will each speak for about 25 to 30 minutes, after which we will be able to ask some very, very interesting questions. So everyone, please join me in welcoming our great speakers, Leslie Kean and Tim Gallaudet.
Can everybody hear me okay? I'm just, okay. So, as he said, 25 to 30 minutes. So I'm going to kind of go quickly and just cover a bunch of basic points that I think will just lead us to the questioning and discussion period, which is really what I think we're all eager to participate in. So anyway, I'm a journalist, as Hubert mentioned, and I was just doing my regular old job as a journalist when in 1999 I was sent a translation of a report that came out in France. And it was called UFOs and Defense, What Are We Prepared For? And it just arrived in my desk from a friend in France. And it was written by 3-star generals, a 4-star general, an admiral, a chief of police, very, very distinguished people from France. And they study these official cases of UFO encounters, which had so much data with them that they could rule out conventional explanations. This is what this is what it looked like. I got this thing in the mail. This simple little white paper changed my life forever, because I read this report and I could not believe the conclusions. Not only were the case studies really interesting, but the conclusions that these absolutely, high-level people from France came to. The purpose of their report, as they described it, was stripping the phenomenon of UFOs of its irrational layer. There was indeed so many irrational layers around this topic in those days that it was completely taboo. And there's a long history as to why that was the case. But they described these objects as completely unknown flying machines with exceptional performances that are guided by natural or artificial intelligence. And they said they could be craft of extraterrestrial origin. And in fact, they believed that the most logical, rational, and valid explanation for the sightings was the extraterrestrial hypothesis. And I'm sitting there as a reporter and thinking like, my God, this is huge. This is a big story. Even if there's a small percentage that we're being visited by crafts from somewhere else, that's big. And look at the people that are telling us this is the case. What if the equivalent people in America said this? What would happen? So my curiosity was really piqued by this, and I was eventually able to write a story for the Boston Globe some months later. It was a huge thing to be able to do it because nobody wanted to cover UFOs in those days, and the point I want to make in this talk is how different the world was pre-2017 when the New York Times story came out, and the world that I lived in for 17 years as I kept trying to push this forward. I mean, for instance, this article, the editor wrote the headline. She called these admirals and generals who had studied data for 3 years UFO theorists. That was the best you could get away with in those days. And then when the article was picked up by another newspaper, they wrote their headlines, UFOs might be real. So in those days, nobody thought UFOs were real. And so UFOs might be real was kind of a radical thing to say in those days. So it was just so different. And now we all know that they are real. We don't know what they are, but they're real. So the next area I got into, I started reporting on aviation safety issues. I'm going to go through this very quickly, but this was a story I did for the Providence Journal that was picked up all over the place. And there were just so many fascinating cases of pilots encountering these things, yet they were all afraid to report them. I'll just read you one little tiny excerpt here from the story. In stunning detail, pilots and crew describe a range of geometric forms and lights inconsistent with known aircraft or natural phenomena. Bizarre objects paced aircraft at relatively near distances, sometimes disabling cockpit instruments, interrupting ground communications, or distracting the crew. Anyway, that was from a report written by a former senior scientist at NASA that was just documenting all these cases, including 56 near misses. They're not very common, but this was an important thing to focus on because it allowed the official world a reason to care and to take it seriously. So over many years, I just want you all to know there is so much evidence out there for the reality of this phenomenon. There has been for decades, since the 40s and 50s. So I studied photographs, I studied cases of physical trace evidence, which meant that a UFO lands on the ground and leaves, burns in the grasses, or radiation that can be studied. There's physical evidence that can be studied. The radar visual sightings are extraordinary, where you have multiple witnesses seeing an object that is also picked up on radar, and the radar tracings correspond to what they're seeing. It's documentation that there's something there. effects on airplanes being pulled off courses, you know, their equipment going out, and these are both military and commercial airplanes. And most of them, again, weren't even reported, so there were a lot more than we knew because surveys were done. I didn't quite finish that one, but anyway, government documents are one of the key areas to look for information. There are hundreds and hundreds of documents that have been released through the Freedom of Information Act that clearly establish without a doubt the reality of this phenomenon. So then, after 10 years of work, I did write this book, and I was fortunate enough to be able to get a lot of very high-level generals and other officials from around the world to write chapters in the book. And it was a big deal because, again, I'm establishing the reality of the phenomenon. It was all about UFOs are real. I would go on media and they'd say, does this show that UFOs are real? And I had to keep explaining to people what a UFO was, too, because there was a misconception that UFO meant alien spacecraft by definition. I mean, that's what I think most people think today, but in those days, that's what it meant to people. So I had to constantly explain to people a UFO is simply something unidentified in the sky, and the Air Force were the ones that created that term for it. I also became to learn more and more about the level of secrecy and denial that was going on in our government. There really has been a cover-up of information. That's a big topic. And I got to know some of the insiders, especially after the book came out, people with clearances, people who have been involved for decades working in government programs in various capacities, and they really knew a lot. And that was a very important aspect of my work, was to get sort of inside with these people. People think there aren't photographs of UFOs. I know Milbury asked me to show some photographs. I couldn't resist showing you a couple before we move into the 2017 era. This is one of my all-time favorite UFO photographs. This was taken from a mapping plane in Costa Rica that had, by the Costa Rican government, it had a camera strapped underneath the airplane so that it just automatically took pictures of the terrain and these very large negatives. And in one of these images, this disc showed up. And it's crystal clear. It was not supposed to be there. The disc has been, this image has been studied by numerous scientists who we're able to learn a lot about it. Its direction, its size, its speed, and all kinds of things. There's a lot of technical papers that have been written about it, but it's clearly something unexplained. It has not been explained. This is a second photo that I just wanted to show you guys, taken by a state police officer in 1987, actually off of Route 84 in Connecticut, which many of you may be familiar with. There was a wave of sightings in the 1980s in the Hudson Valley in New York. For a couple of years, hundreds of people saw these recurring objects, and they'd pull over along the Taconic Parkway in their cars and stop and look at these gigantic objects that were hovering or silently passing by. And in those days, people didn't have cell phones, but this police officer had a camera, and he took this picture. I find it really quite beautiful because you can see the lights, but assumedly there's some kind of an object there in the darkness. So anyway, I persevered. I did a lot of conferences and press conferences and just all kinds of stuff to travel around, try to get the word out about UFOs. And they are a genuine mystery. And the more I learned about them, the more I became curious, because there is so much information, and yet there is so much denial from the official world and the scientific world. And it just didn't make any sense to me. So, and all the work I did, nobody really responded. I mean, that report about the aviation safety cases was sent all over the aviation community. It got no response. The government didn't, the Congress wasn't interested. Nobody was really responding to the work, even though things were coming out that were really significant. So in 2017, everything changed. We're now in a new world when it comes to UFOs. And as Hubert mentioned, Ralph Blumenthal and myself and Helene Cooper, who's the Pentagon correspondent at the New York Times, wrote this front page story for the New York Times. And the way it happened was that I was called to a meeting in October of that year to meet the former head of this Pentagon program that Hubert mentioned. This program had been operating in secret for about a decade, a little less than a decade, and it was headed up by a man named Luis Elizondo, who I've come to know very well. And he has been part of the articles Ralph and I have done for the New York Times for years. And he was resigning his job because he felt that he had a national security problem on his hands and nobody was paying attention within the Department of Defense. He couldn't get it up the chain of command. There were people blocking his ability to do his work. So he decided to go out into the public arena and try to reach Congress and use the media and try to talk to members of Congress and be more public about it. And so I was able to go to this meeting. I was shown all these incredible documents about the program. I was shown Harry Reid's letters. Harry Reid, the former Senate Majority Leader, was the person who made this program possible in the beginning. The letter of resignation that Elizondo wrote to Secretary of James Mattis, as Secretary of Defense. None of this had been made public yet. And I was also shown these videos, which I'm going to show you in a minute. The name of that program was the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program. And I don't know how hard it is for you all to imagine because you're not reporters. But after 17 years of advocating for a government agency to be set up in the United States and then to walk into this meeting and learn that there was one already, and to be shown documentation and to be given sources on the record who could talk about it and allow it to come out through a story that I would be able to contribute to was like nothing more that I could have asked for. It was just an amazing moment. I'll never forget it. It's just a picture taken at the end of that meeting. That was a much younger Luis Elizondo, for those who are familiar with him now. Christopher Mellon, the tall guy, Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Intelligence, and Jim Semivan, a 25-year veteran of the CIA. They were both very close to the program that Lou worked with. And Lou Elizondo was, this thing always moves when I don't want it to. He was absolutely terrified in that meeting. I sat opposite him for 3 hours. He could not believe that he was going to be in the public arena because he was so used to being in the shadows. He's a counterintelligence official. So he was terrified, but you can't really tell in that picture. So the story came out 3 months later by Ralph, Helene, and I. We worked on it for a few months, and we were able to get Harry Reid on the record, which was absolutely crucial to the validity of the story. He told us everything about how he had set it up. This was a picture of the front page. This is the second page. It was quite a long piece. And it was huge. I mean, this thing was picked up everywhere. The world was, it was like an explosion that, oh my God, the Pentagon. And it was really mainly about the program that the Pentagon had. The fact that they had this program meant that there was something to this, or they wouldn't be studying it. And it also gave permission to media and others to take it seriously. One of the things we covered as part of our story was the Nimitz case. I don't know if many of you might be familiar with it. But we sort of added this at the end. This was a case that took place in 2004. It's one of the best documented and most well-known UFO cases in recent history. And it involved objects that have been were being tracked by the USS Princeton battle group off of the coast of San Diego for a couple of weeks. They were observing these amazing anomalous objects that could do things like go from 80,000 feet to 20,000 feet in 1 second, things like that. And on November 14th of that year, 2004, two planes were sent up to check out one of these objects there were 4 people involved, a pilot and a co-pilot in each aircraft. And they witnessed the water below them. They went right to where the object was. The water was churning and foamy, and above the water there was this object darting around about 40 feet long that they described as looking like a tic-tac, and behaving in extraordinarily anomalous ways, stopping and starting and making sharp turns and things like that. So one of the aircraft, which was piloted by David Fravor, went down to it. The object knew he was there because it started to mimic the flight path that he was taking as he circled around to try to get a closer look. And eventually he headed right for the object, and it just took off with the blink of an eye. So this case became a very, very big deal, and this is just a still from a video of the object that was taken a few hours later. I just want to show you a clip of David Fravor very briefly describing what was so unusual about this.
What was it about the movement of this or the appearance of this that made you believe it wasn't from this world as opposed to something else?
Well, the first thing is it had no wings, so you think, okay, it's a helicopter. Well, there's no rotor wash in the water. There's no rotors. And when helicopters move side to side, they kind of slow and then they pick up speed going the other way. This was extremely abrupt, like a ping pong ball bouncing off a wall. It would hit and go the other way and change directions at will. And then the ability to hover over the water and then start a vertical climb from basically 0 up towards about 12,000 feet and then accelerate in less than 2 seconds and disappear is something I had never seen in my life.
Yeah, and the other thing that was really important about the article, of course, was that Ralph and Helene and I included 2 videos, which are now everywhere. And I just want to show you one of them. These are our official Navy videos. This one was taken off the coast of Jacksonville, Florida in 2015. And there is some swearing in this video, but I think everybody can handle that.
Dude, this is a fucking drone, bro. There's a whole fleet of them. Look on the ASA. My gosh. They're all going against the wind. The wind's 120 knots to the west. Look at that thing, dude. That's not our LNS though, is it? It's not. That is an LNS, dude. Well, if there's like... Look at that thing. It's rotated.
And you might have heard them say there's a whole fleet of them. Well, there was a whole fleet of them, but that part of the video was not provided to us, the public, but it exists. And so that, I'm curious, is there, are there people, how many people in this room have never seen that video? Have not seen it before? Yeah, see, I didn't even need to show it. Anyway, I'm just, yeah, okay. It's just everywhere, this video. Anyway, so I got to move along here because I know we need to get to the questions. So Ralph and I stayed on this. We did our second story in 2019 for the New York Times about pilot sightings. And this is when Lieutenant Ryan Graves came forward. He was an active duty pilot at the time, involved with a Navy squadron that were having lots and lots of incidents with these objects. And he was extremely courageous to come forward because most pilots wait until they're retired if they're going to say anything at all. He has become a major player in the universe of UAP work. He's set up organizations. He's worked with members of Congress to write legislation. He's just a very, very become a real figure in the UFO world or UAP world. And he described incidents such as a pilot and his wingmen who were flying in tandem. They were about 100 feet apart over the east coast of the Atlantic Ocean, and something flew right between them, right past their cockpit. And dangerous. It was a near miss. And the pilots described it as looking like this. A sphere with a cube inside. And objects like this are just being seen almost daily by these off the coast of the United States. There are reports coming in on them all the time. One more video to show you, which is also really fun to watch. This we also released through the Times, and this was taken in the area around 2015 where Ryan Graves and his squadron were operating.
No, I took an auto track. Oh, okay. Oh my gosh, dude. Wow, look at it fly.
Clearly something very unusual and thrilling for these pilots to see. And these videos are also part of the universe of data that we have. And these videos were acknowledged by the Navy to be authentic Navy videos of unexplained objects. So eventually, members of Congress started to get a lot of briefings that pilots were going in to talk to them, the people from the Department of Defense, from the intelligence community, and the Congress became more and more interested, and they wanted to know more, and they wanted to know why this information had been withheld from them for so long. In 2021, a very important report was released, which Congress requested. And what was important about this report from the Office of the Director of National Intelligence was not only it really established absolutely 100% that UFOs are real objects. I mean, that was basically written in this report. Nobody could argue with that anymore. But what I found particularly interesting about it was there was the question of, well, if they're real, could they be Russian, Chinese, or could they be secret American technology? Those seemed to be the possibilities that people were holding at that time. And this report basically said that we have no data to indicate that they are technology from any of our adversaries, which would be China or Russia. So they kind of ruled out that. And then they also said that we don't have any data that they're high-level technology from America either. So this question became sort of bubbled up more and more about, are they Russian or Chinese? We don't think they are, and we don't think they're American either. And the Congress people began to become more outspoken about this over time as they received more and more briefings. Here is Senator Mitt Romney in 2021 who said, I don't believe they're coming from foreign adversaries. If they were, why that would suggest that they have a technology which is in a whole different sphere than anything we understand. And frankly, China and Russia just aren't there, and neither are we, by the way. And so these are, again, Mitt Romney and others were people who were briefed at very high levels and knew a lot more than any of us did. So things were snowballing at this point. Scientists became involved. Avi Loeb set up the Galileo Project, which was a window of opportunity for many scientists to jump in this. And Tim's going to talk about this project because he's involved with it. NASA set up a study group. Actually, NASA, who had never wanted anything to do with this topic before, would set up an independent study group, and in 2023 they issued a report which basically said that they felt that this was something that needed further study. It demanded a rigorous and evidence-based approach to learning more about it. And I just wanted to share with you one more video. At this NASA press conference in 2023, the head of the Department of Defense program, which was mandated by Congress to look into this topic and present reports to the public and to Congress, the head of that program presented this very interesting video, and I just want you to see that. Okay, next slide it is. And we go like this. There we go.
This is an example of one that I showed at the hearing recently. This is a spherical orb, metallic, in the Middle East, 2022, by an MQ-9. I will come back to the sensor question that David raised here in a moment. This is a typical example of the thing that we see most of. We see these all over the world, and we see these in making very interesting apparent maneuver.
So that was the head of the Department of Defense program, very high-level guy, and the fact that these are seen all over the world, which he said is pretty significant. What are they? How do they operate? Where are they from? We don't know. One of the next big developments, and again, there's so much that's been happening, I can cover all of it, but Ralph and I broke the story together in 2023 of David Grush, the whistleblower. I don't know if many of you are familiar with him, but he was a high-level intelligence official who worked both at the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency and the National Reconnaissance Office. Very high clearances, access to lots of information. He was part of the government UAP task force, and while he was there, he discovered through interviews and seeing lots of documentation that there are programs within, sort of like rogue programs within the U.S. government that possess actual crashed craft of UFOs, not from this earth, not man-made. And he came out with this information. It was absolutely stunning. He's highly respected. He had no reason to make any of this up. And he got the information by talking to over 40 people, some of them within these programs, members of these programs. He also testified under oath for the Inspector General because he had the Intelligence Community Inspector General because he had been harassed and threatened as a result of speaking out. And the Inspector General ruled that his testimony was credible and urgent, and there was lots of investigation that went on around it. He also went and spoke to Congress for over 11 hours in closed sessions, in classified sessions, and the Congress received the specific information from him that we can't have because it's classified, all about the names of the programs, the people involved, the locations, how long they've been going on, all the details that all of us want to know, but we're not allowed to have it. But the Congress has it, and others have it too. And so this was a really big turning point, the summer of 2023. At that time also, Chuck Schumer, in cooperation with Senator Rounds, it was this bipartisan legislation that he proposed, and he's been working on it for years because parts of it keep getting cut out. But he basically talked about non-human intelligence, which has sort of become the buzzword for whoever operates the UFOs, the NHI they call them. And this was actually in congressional legislation, a definition of non-human intelligence. He defined it as any sentient, intelligent, non-human life form, regardless of nature or ultimate origin, which may be presumed responsible for UFOs. In other words, it's the force behind the UFOs. We don't know what it is, but it's clearly very intelligent and very advanced. And so he made a lot of very interesting proposals. He's still working on this legislation. And there had been previous legislation. That's another thing that was going on consistently every year. There's legislation introduced to the National Defense Authorization Act to protect whistleblowers, to try to get more transparency, to request studies from the Department of Defense, and all these very useful things that all of us want to see come to pass. Additionally, that summer, there was a open congressional hearing organized by the House Oversight Subcommittee in which David Grush testified. He's the one in the middle. On the left is Ryan Graves, the pilot that Ralph and I wrote about in 2019, and David Fravor to his right, the pilot from the Nimitz case, who we also wrote about in the New York Times. This was an absolutely explosive event because you had this individual from the intelligence community telling members of Congress that we possess crashed UFOs. And the Congress people took it very seriously and asked very good questions. And just a week ago, there was another open congressional hearing. And this one involved our next speaker, Tim Gallaudet, as one of the 4 witnesses. Luis Elizondo, the person who resigned from the Pentagon, who we wrote about in 2017, was also one of the witnesses. And he basically confirmed what David Grush has said. He confirmed under oath the reality of the crash retrieval program. And he is in a position to know. So now what's happening is we're shifting not just are they Russian or Chinese? We kind of dealt with that one. We're now shifting to people actually having the courage to come in the universe, and I have knowledge of that. That's what Lou Elizondo told the Congress. And he says, this is a quote from his opening speech, excessive secrecy has led to grave misdeeds against loyal civil servants, military personnel, and the public, all to hide the fact that we are not alone in the cosmos. And just quickly before I close, you want to know, like, what do we know about UFOs? We know a lot about their capabilities, but we don't know anything about their intentions. And threat is defined as capability plus intent. So we have half the equation. We have to consider them a threat because of their incredible capabilities. These were the 6 observables that were set up by the program that Lou Elizondo headed at the Pentagon. And they're just some of the characteristics that these objects demonstrate, all things that we don't have the technology that can do any of this. These have been demonstrated over and over and over again since the 1950s. And you have to ask yourself, 50s and 60s, they certainly weren't Chinese, Russian, or American. So the anti-gravity lift means that they can fly with no wings. They basically can just move around with not paying attention to what we consider to be necessary for aviation, as if there's no gravity. Hypersonic velocities with nothing like vapor trails or sonic booms that we know have to occur. And they accelerate so instantaneously that anything living in those objects would be squashed. I mean, it's like going from a standstill to so fast that they disappear in the blink of an eye. Transmedium travel means that they can navigate through space, the atmosphere, and underwater. And we've been learning more about the UFOs being under the water, which is really fascinating, and Tim is going to talk to you more about that. And then the biological effects on people, which is sort of something that's getting more recognition now. If you're too close to an object, you're affected by it physically, and your consciousness can be affected as well. If you have encounters or even interactions with these craft and even entities that are involved with the craft. But that's another thing that we won't get into. And then just briefly, there was an incredible document entered into the congressional record just last week about a secret program, a secret special access program that was set up in 2017 to collect all the data on UFOs. And this was presented by a whistleblower who is afraid to put his name on the record, but I've spoken to him and he definitely knows what he's talking about, and he had access to this data. And this is what that data said about the shapes of the UFOs. These are the different ways they appear. The spheres and orbs, disks and saucer type objects are the way most common of all of them. Nowadays, it's interesting because there were times throughout in history where the triangles were very, very common. But right now, as you saw in that video from the Department of Defense, the spheres are very, very common. Orbs are also common. They're small. And they're just these lights that'll go into people's houses as if they're surveilling them. This happened to a number of people that I've spoken to, including Luis Elizondo when he was working at the Pentagon. So, as I said, we know a lot about the capabilities of the object, but we don't know why they're here or where they're from or what they're trying to do. And there's a caution around that because they're penetrating our sensitive military spaces, protected spaces where they're not supposed to be. They're fooling around with our Navy jets, and you know, a lot of the military are very concerned about this, and they consider it to be a threat. The last story that Ralph and I wrote together was in August. We wrote a story about Lou Elizondo's book, which came out last summer. I just wanted to recommend if anybody here wants to sort of get a sense of the overall picture of all of this in one book, this is the book I would recommend. It was a #1 New York Times bestseller for a while after it came out in August, and it's absolutely excellent book. And I just want to quickly read you one thing that Lou says, which sums everything up. This is what he says in his book. Unidentified craft with beyond next generation technology, including the ability to move in ways that defy our knowledge of physics and do so within air, water, and space, have been operating with complete impunity all over the world since at least World War II. These craft are not made by humans. Humanity is, in fact, not the only intelligent life in the universe, and not the alpha species. So that takes some getting used to. That's a big statement, and a lot of people find that very hard to come to terms with. John Mack has called things like this ontological shock, that we have to kind of readjust our sense of reality. But in all the years that I've spent with this, I absolutely believe what Elizondo is saying, and I know that he is in a position to know. And just finally, because we haven't really talked about the nature of the phenomenon that much, but it's very, very complicated. And I just love this quote from Jim Semivan, who was the CIA official who I mentioned earlier, who was at that meeting with Lou. This man has had a close encounter with a UFO, which actually included entities. And he is not making anything up. There are lots of medical effects he had afterwards, and the government got involved with his case. And this is his statement, which I think really is beautiful. I have come to realize that the phenomenon is curiously multifaceted, exasperatingly complex, and appears to exist both in our consensus reality and in another unknown space. Perhaps if we are very lucky, someday we may understand its ultimate purpose. Thank you very much. I turn it over to Tim now.
Very nice, Leslie. That was awesome. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim.
Okay, let's see.
This won't be in your way, right? No.
Felix, I'm not sure how to get my presentation up. Where are you at? Here he is coming aboard. Let me, oh, there we are. I don't think I need to stand on this little step here there. Let me actually, thank you everybody. It's great to be here. But I will, let me just second what Leslie said about that CIA officer, Jim Semivan. He retired as the head of domestic operations. He was not just some random contractor. He was a very senior official. So his quotation is has authority, and is significant. And he's a friend of mine, and I've spoken with him at length about his experience. So thank you, Leslie, and thank you, Hubert, and thank you, Ralph. What a great introduction. It's great to be here. So you covered a lot of territory for me, so thankfully I'll be able to kind of whisk through this and save more room for questions. But quickly, here's a little bit about me. I am blessed to have a wonderful family. I have 3 daughters, one of which is a midshipman at the academy, and she's standing there with her boyfriend, who's also a midshipman. And my wife, Karen, was also an academy graduate like me, Navy salvage diver, a hero in my eyes. And the reason I'm speaking out, because she asked me to. Thank you. And I mean that. When this was all coming out, we were following it, and Karen looked at me and said, "Tim, look at you with your experience. You have a voice. You should come to the table here." And I have, and I'm grateful for your advice. But a couple other things about me, and I totally screwed that up. Sorry. Okay, there we are. Okay, my naval experience quickly. Really, 32 years in a nutshell. Served on aircraft carrier. Love the job. It's very relevant now in what I'm going to talk about. I was off the deck. I drove the ship. But I also worked with the submarine community. Here I am in the Arctic Ocean, and kind of why I'm here at the Explorers Club. I've been all around the world with the Navy, and the submarine community uses knowledge of the ocean. I'm an oceanographer. That was my job in the Navy, and it was really rewarding to bring that to bear to keep our naval forces at their maximum advantage. Also worked with Navy SEALs in a big way, and they use the environment and knowledge of the environment more than probably any naval force there is, and I was also proud to support a lot of our combat operations in Iraq and Afghanistan. And then, of course, finished off in the Pentagon as the head oceanographer in the Navy, working for the chief of the Navy naval operations. So had a full Navy career, very rewarding for me in the specialty field of naval oceanography. And then I brought that to lead a U.S. government agency called the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA, America's top ocean, climate, weather, environmental agency, which was very rewarding. I have a book coming out in August about that experience. It happened to be under the Trump administration. There's a whole other story there. I won't go into it now, but it's relevant as he starts picking cabinet secretaries and whatnot. But a really great agency with 20,000 federal and contractor employees, 18 environmental satellites, 8 supercomputers, 16 ships, 9 aircraft, all doing environmental science and important work for our nation to manage fisheries, chart the oceans, manage and adapt to climate change, and you name it. So I just loved working there. So that though gave me a lot of experience and expertise to come to this whole discussion. Now, currently, I just want to bring to this club, I have had a flagged expedition. From my work at NOAA and working with fisheries and protecting endangered species, I got to do a really neat project with a citizen science organization off Guadalupe Island off Mexico to count, basically, great white sharks. Part of a 20-year time series. We did this in 2021, my wife and I, Karen. She was a Navy diver, and really rewarding to contribute to the science of studying these amazing animals because they're an indicator of the health of the entire ecosystem, being apex predators. And so from NOAA, my experience was a lot of ocean science, and we did that. So here's my Explorers Club contribution. There you go. Thank you. Not included here, but where I met Richard for the first time was my participation in the event to recognize Don Walsh, my hero in ocean exploration, the man who dived for the first time with Jean Piccard to the Marianas Trench. And I was able to participate in his 90th birthday celebration event here at this building, and that was very rewarding. But moving on, okay. Oh, God, I keep doing that, sorry. And so, why am I interested in UAP, UFOs, whatever? First off, I had a tour as a captain at the Naval Observatory. The Naval Observatory's mission is to chart and map stars for use for satellite navigation. It was relevant in the age of sail. It's relevant today. You ask yourself, how does GPS tell me where I am on the Earth? Well, you know how? GPS fixes its location in this constellation of satellites on known celestial sources that are so far away they're relatively fixed. And the Naval Observatory determines those positions. So you don't know where you are unless you have what the Naval Observatory provides, GPS. Same for time precise time is important, and they operate the system of clocks, atomic clocks that are used for time reference. In the age of sail, it was the position of the sun at noon that gave you precise time. Now it's a bunch of atomic clocks. So a really neat special mission. But I worked with 1,000 or 100, pardon me, astrophysicists who knew about the universe. And I learned some things, like the galaxy of the Milky Way has 100 to 400 billion stars. And we don't even know the exact number. And that's only part of an observable universe that has, we estimate, 2 trillion galaxies. So the universe is so vast, it's incomprehensible to our real understanding. And to think that we're the only species that's evolved to travel between celestial bodies is quite myopic, in my opinion. And we know life is a property of the universe because we're here. So just like connect all those dots. So I was open-minded to that. And then, but I keep doing that. I'm sorry, Felix. Here we go. My confirmation came in 2015. Okay, and in one of those videos, and one of those aviators that Leslie mentioned, Ryan Graves, was flying off this ship, the USS Theodore Roosevelt, in 2015 during an exercise called Comp 2X. I was a 1-star admiral. My sailors were on that ship forecasting weather. That was my job, weather and oceanography. And these pilots were having multiple encounters with these things. I get an email on Navy's secret network, and it was from the operations officer of the U.S. Fleet Forces Command, the 4-star admiral in charge of this exercise. And the title of the email on the secret network was Urgent Safety of Flight Issue. And the text was very brief, but alarming, and it said, if any of you know what these are, tell me ASAP. We're having numerous near mid-air collisions, and we're going to have to shut down the exercise if we don't resolve this. And attached was the Go Fast video, where you hear all the pilots, expletives, and all that, because they were astonished at this stuff. And it was happening all the time. For a 2-star admiral to shut down an exercise that was a pre-deployment workup, very compressed, got to get the ships out, got to get the pilots qualified on the carrier. The pressure is insane. For him to even talk about shutting down the exercise was I've never seen it before. And these things were doing it. So, by the way, there are debunkers out there that talk about this Go Fast video possibly being just a balloon. And there were so many of them out there, and so much was occurring. A 2-star would not shut down that exercise or even talk about it if it was just a bunch of balloons. They were sure this was safety of flight. And Leslie talked about the section being split, the 2 aircraft. It was serious. So I saw that, and I knew immediately, well, we don't do technology demonstrations in U.S. training areas. We just don't do it because of the pressure of workup cycles. And so I was pretty convinced at that time, okay, this is not our tech. I knew it wasn't China or Russia tech because I'd been reading all the threats. I had secret access program access, and I knew, okay, this is something different. But I couldn't say much about it, and I'll talk about that later because I stayed in government. But ultimately, I found out later, I know what happened. That email was wiped from my computer the next day, and my boss and the operations officer never talked about it in different meetings. How did that happen? Because this gentleman in charge of the UAP task force at the time directed that the email be taken off because he wasn't sure if that was U.S. tech or not, as Leslie mentioned. Jay Stratton, he led that task force, and he actually, that little symbol in the middle, he just got an award this year for leading his effort to investigate UFOs by the current director of national intelligence, which is quite astonishing. It kind of reveals this sort of fractured nature of our UAP policy right now, that he gets an award, but we don't talk about it. I don't know what. So that's a whole other thing. But that email was wiped from my computer because Jay directed it so, and they were trying to investigate. Is that U.S. tech, adversary tech, or something different? And ultimately, I've communicated with Jay, and we realize now it was not U.S. tech, and it was not adversary tech. It's something different, and we don't know what it is. There. So ultimately, though, Leslie talked about the hearing last year, non-human intelligence, technology of unknown origin. Ryan Graves, the pilot. I'm on his board. I'm actually at the very far left there. I went to that hearing, and amazing. And then, of course, there was the members that Leslie talked about. I know really well because I had people that worked under me at his agency, the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. So a lot of you are probably, who here has worked in the U.S. government? Raise your hand. That's not that many people. So good for you, by the way. But I understand the government, and I know this agency super well. This guy is highly credible. Okay, I can tell you, he knows what he's doing. He's a professional. When he says what he saw and who he's talked to, I totally know it to be true. Same with this pilot. I worked on aircraft carrier. I supported Navy pilots. That was my job. Dave Fravors, CEO of a squadron. And he was a Top Gun graduate. He absolutely credible. And he was on 60 Minutes with his wingman person, Alex, who is also wonderful, amazing, credible, and courageous to come out and talk about this. She was on 60 Minutes too. By the way, a breast cancer survivor. I can't say enough good things about this really courageous young woman coming out and doing this. She's currently a professor at Colorado State University. But they've done this. They've come out. And then Ryan, who also Navy pilot at 2015 at the Roosevelt, seeing these objects. And now he has this organization called Americans for Safe Aerospace to promote commercial pilots to report. The FAA had total stigma on this. Careers were squashed if people would come out and talk about this. And he has draft legislation in place. And during the hearing that we were at, thankfully, Representative Garcia supported that legislation. And we hope to get that forward to make a program at FAA to allow pilots to report. We just need more data so we can understand what's going on, the phenomena. Love this guy. And so then, of course, the hearing, the second hearing just last week, holy cow, and I spoke at it, and you can check it out. And Lou and I both, basically, the conclusion was this: we're not alone, and I know we're not alone. This is the thing. Richard, I appreciate your skepticism, but I know enough people in the programs that are managing retrieved craft and data, and I've seen an extensive amount of it, it's classified, to know it to be true, and that's why I'm speaking out. And there's reasons for this. It's not. I believe in keeping technology and the things that keep our country safe classified, but the nature of reality is not an exclusive government right. There is a new reality here. And we are a government by the people, for the people, and the people deserve to know the nature of reality, and the government knows it. So, and so that's just a giant reason why I've come out. I wanted to point to the credible people that are also coming out. Chris Mellon was talked about by Leslie, a former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Intelligence, a great advocate, super credible. Carl Nell, former Army lead for the UAP task force in the DoD, excellent thought leader on this topic, knows without a doubt, he's seen the data. He's a great advocate. And then Leslie, of course, and Ross Coulthard, an Australian journalist, leading the investigative work to get this out there with superb integrity. So please give Leslie a giant round of applause for this. Leslie mentioned Avi. Avi's terrific because he's an astrophysicist. And what he brings to the table with his Galileo project is perspective. So you just got to think about it. The universe is 14 billion years old. The Earth's been around for 4 billion years. To think that in our small existence as a species, which is not even 1 million years, civilizations have not evolved, and effort to build a system of observatories to look for the potential for extraterrestrial craft and relics. Like we have the Voyager probe is it has gone interstellar, and it's going out there beyond our solar system. It's not unreasonable to think that other craft have exited other solar systems and now are going to be here. So he's looking for those, as well as maybe actual real live things. And so he's a really good mind and advocate in this area, and I'm glad to be his research affiliate. There's other people that are doing interesting things, like Dr. Beatrice Villarreal. She's an astronomer. I was the superintendent of the Naval Observatory. I really like what she's doing. She went and looked at photographic plates of astronomical observations. You see on the left there, 1952. This is the way we did it before the digital age. The U.S. Naval Observatory had thousands of these things that I was in charge of, and compared them to modern digital star observations and found stars to be missing. Now, in the 4 decades or so that these stars went missing, star events and deaths, if you will, don't happen on that short of a time scale. So we would see indicators that the star was going through some kind, its life cycle of stars is kind of complex, but it's not on the scale of 40 years. And we're seeing stars that are not there anymore. What's going on with that? So she's been courageous in looking into that aspect and a study of potentially the phenomena. And this happened to coincide with that UAP flap, they call it, over Washington, D.C., the same year and time frame, which is very interesting. And you can look that up if you haven't heard about it. But there's others, and now I'm a part of the Soul Foundation, the premier UAP think tank, and associated with Stanford University, led by Dr. Gary Nolan, a biomedical scientist, and really a polymath. He knows everything. And Peter Skafish, he's more of a humanities guy, he's social-cultural anthropologist. And then Jonathan Berta, who's in Europe, a private sector, all trying to bring those different aspects to bear on the study of this with credibility. And then others who are just phenomenal contributors to this topic. E.O. Whiteley in College of London is a aviation and aerospace psychologist. Diana Pasoka is a professor of religious studies at University of North Carolina, Wilmington. And Jacques Vallée is a longtime UAP researcher with giant contributions to Silicon Valley. And these are all just amazing thought leaders, and there's just a small subsample of the people supporting this effort. This is a rising tide. Okay, people, credible professors and established academics are coming on board, and you're going to see a sea change. You're seeing a sea change now in acceptance. Now, personally, I should share with you a few things. In the 2 years or so I've come out, people have come to me. I've encouraged them. Before, they didn't want to talk about it. Leslie addressed this. There's a stigma. But now, here you are, Navy Admiral coming out. Well, gosh, maybe I should have him reach out to him and share my story. And so I've had a lot of sailors and NOAA Corps officers and scientists come to me and say, here's my story. And these were just the few that I've seen have happened over the last 2 years. And these are the platforms they've happened on. And, I mean, this is real stuff. These are ships, aircraft operated by the U.S. government and credible observers. And I won't go into details, but I keep a log of all this, and I'm working to compile the research with others. And interestingly, here's just one example. I mean, just after my hearing, I got a call. I won't give his name, sorry. An expert acoustician, former P-3 pilot, retired as a captain in the Navy, and then started working on what they call the Navy's low-frequency acoustic ship, the Corey Schwest, which basically, when the Navy looks for subs in the Western Pacific and near Iceland for Russia, we use U.S. sub, like a Los Angeles class. We use a P-3 or now a P-8 aircraft, drop sonar buoys, and we use these really cool ships that have giant sonars, an active one and a passive one. I won't go into the technical details, but they're dang good. And he called me and said, I saw something that I can't explain off Japan in 1990 and 1991. And what happened is these low-frequency active sonars can find anything in a giant area. They're very powerful, 200 decibel level, source level, and they find subs all the time, and they're able to then use a passive sonar to ID the sub halt. Basically, okay, the frequency of the propeller and the machinery, we know it is a Los Angeles class or it's a Russian Victor. They're really good, okay? This is all classified. I mean, the details are classified. And they got a hit on the active sonar twice. I mean, these hits are real. This is just like seeing it's like the videos, okay? This is an acoustic video of something, a craft. Okay, sure as day. Where's the passive hit? Nothing. Zero. We got this giant hit. This is a thing. This is like having an image. But there was no frequency of propeller blades or whatever, and he can't explain it. We just don't know anything like it. It just can't be explained by a conventional submarine or anything. Unmanned vehicle, nothing. I mean, and he was, this is so, as an expert in this field, he was so compelled to call me because he'd never seen anything like it and could not explain it. And this is not random. Lou Elizondo, he's seen imagery of things under the water, classified imagery, big things, giant craft moving underwater, the size of oil derricks. And I know, and that wasn't just Lou, I have confirmation from other sources that are still in the government. So this stuff is out there, and that's why I have, as an oceanographer, have been a champion trying to investigate these craft as they go in the water, and we're seeing them. And if you read Lou's book that Leslie mentioned, Imminent, there's a giant connection with the ocean, and we're not sure what about it. I mean, if you want to hide anywhere, you might as well go in the ocean, because we've only explored 5 to 10% of it, and we've only mapped about 25% of the seafloor. So if there's anywhere to go that you don't want to be seen by humanity, it's the ocean. So there's a lot of observations like this. The USS Omaha in 2019 saw this object. It's not a helicopter. It was hovering for a while. Goes into the water. How did it happen? This is an infrared video of it. And it turns out, after my hearing, I get a call from the senior chief on watch who was on the bridge from there. And he told me all about it. There were a bunch of them. And he saw it come out of the water and then go back into the water. And he said, and here's what else happened. I then went to the other ship in the area, the USS Jackson, and I saw a lot more stuff. And I won't go into the details because we're compressed on time, but I have some video, Leslie, by the way, which is really interesting. And this senior chief is so interesting. And I'm so, and it's funny, when you talk about credibility of sources, I was in the Navy. I know enlisted sailors. This guy's so legit, and I just am so proud of his courage. And we can talk about that later, and that will come out. But that's coming out. And then I'm trying to get the U.S. government to openly study these UAP in the ocean. And this man was the former head of the Navy, and now he's in charge of this Naval Studies Board at the National Academies. And I recommended to him, let's put up a program to study UAPs in the ocean. And he said, good idea. Not only will we learn about our maritime domain that we don't know a lot about, there's a lot of gaps in it, but it'll help us get better against China, who's rapidly eclipsing us in our understanding of the ocean. And that's a whole other story. But I'm working on that. I wrote a white paper for the Seoul Foundation. I'm on their advisory board. It's all about looking at UAP in the ocean. Here it is. Google it. It hopefully will encourage some thought for you all about it. It was the first white paper, and I was really proud to contribute to it. And the bottom line was, I think we can really learn a lot more about UAP if we look in the ocean, because the ocean's so unexplored. We're seeing them all over the atmosphere and space. We're seeing them a little bit in the ocean only because we don't really observe the ocean very much. We might learn a lot more if we observe the ocean more. And then some other things. If you are interested in the government's disinformation campaign, which is very active and unfortunate, and I would say immoral, Google this book and buy it. And I won't go into the details, but the Pentagon's office, AARO, released a report in March, and there were so many flaws in it that Chris Mellon, the gentleman who used to be the DASD for intelligence, wrote an article here, and he just poked holes all over it. And it's unfortunate that government taxpayer dollars are being spent on very inaccurate reporting, and I think disinformation, and I testified to it. So that's another thread, and I don't want to go too long on all this, but that's something that our hearing last week was working to correct. Just yesterday, the Pentagon's Aero director, the new one, testified, and I think he might be going in the right direction. We hope so. I'm going to meet with him in a month or two, and we'll see where that goes. But the point is demanding the government be more transparent and that taxpayer dollars are being spent for the right thing. Lastly, just 2 quick points. So this is the Galileo project team I'm a part of. Avi Loeb's there in the middle. I'm standing next to him. And what's really neat about this whole thing is that there are a lot of young people part of it. And my point in this slide is this, that I see some young people in the room, young compared to me, and which is most everybody. But this generation thing. Well, one of the women I mentioned here, Dr. Ia Whiteley, who is an aviation and aerospace psychologist, she talked about the fact that interesting phenomena in aviation safety. After World War II, there was the right stuff. Aviators were macho, mostly men, and they were really hesitant to report problems in the cockpit. And so what happened is a lot of planes were falling out of the sky and aviators getting killed. And over time, aviation safety reporting and measures were introduced, and the stigma of reporting a problem was overcome. And now you have these aviation safety standards, reporting standards, and that's not a thing. You automatically do that, and it doesn't reflect on your performance record, et cetera. And what a good thing. But it took a while. It took a generational shift. It took about 25 years, a professional generation, for have aviators to say, all right, we got to not be afraid to say something's wrong here. And I think it's the same with this. That we're going to see more young people step up and say, hey, I'm not afraid to acknowledge that this might be a new reality, where most of the older people are afraid, the stigma, et cetera, and that's changing, and I'm encouraged. And I get a lot of people coming to me saying, hey, I hear you were looking into building a master's program in UAP studies. I want to be a part of that. And so definitely, and I'm working to help efforts towards that end. And lastly, there's this. So we're seeing technology that we absolutely can't explain. We don't understand the physics behind it. Not surprising. We've only been on this planet a little while. We've only really advanced technology. Think about Einstein, relativity, just in the last century or so. So we're just quantum mechanics. After that, we really don't know all there is. I mean, to think we do is just really, I think, the hubris is really immense. And so, wow, what is this going to lead to? I mean, think about the advances in terms of energy, biomedicine, transportation, all these things that are possibly beneficial. Of course, there's security risks too. We don't know their intent. You addressed that really well, Leslie. But we should just be clear-eyed about this and bold in our addressing it and learning from what this is, and hopefully using it to benefit humanity. So thanks for your attention, and I guess we can move into Q&A. Now, and just to wrap up, can we go back to that, Felix? That is, can you go back to that? That is a UAP observed by a Navy jet. So how is that thing flying? It was flying faster than the jet. What is it? Where are the control surfaces? Where's the propulsion? This is the thing. How does it do that? I want to know. I'm a scientist. We can learn some things from this. So thank you again, and let's move on.
Well, thank you, Leslie and Tim, for your very powerful presentations. I just wanted to add one little fact that I'm sure you are aware of, but in 1492, supposedly, I didn't verify it, Christopher Columbus, while crossing the Atlantic for the first time, reported in his logbook having seen an object that he described as a rising sun coming out of the water in the middle of the Atlantic, and he took it as a very good omen that his expedition would be successful. Okay, I think that we're going to move to the questions and answers. Yeah. How does that work, Felix? So maybe I'll start with one question which I think is on everybody's mind. If there is a cover-up, and there has been a cover-up for a long time by the U.S. government, what are the reasons for such a cover-up? What would be the reasons for such a cover-up?
Well, I worked in the intelligence community. Even though I was an oceanographer, I was part of the Navy's information warfare community. And it's pretty clear to me that the U.S. government has covered this up because they do not want our adversaries to know that we have weaknesses and gaps in our air and maritime defense and surveillance capabilities. I mean, it shows weakness. And I get that. And as a former admiral, I have accepted it. But the reason I'm coming out now is that Leslie talked about this Schumer amendment. So this Schumer and Rounds got together to talk about the fact that the government's covered up this whole new reality and all these things. And there's a difference here. I'm not advocating for the technology to be released, anything we've learned about that. But it's this whole nature that we're not alone. And that's what should not be covered up. And so that's the difference. And so the government has kind of stuck to its old Cold War era nuclear secrets mentality of not letting things get out for national security, which I get. But we're in a whole different era now. And That's why I'm advocating, let's open our minds, let's open this whole topic to open research and reporting broadly, and the details and the technology aspects should be, we can keep under the wraps, and so that's, but it's revealing weaknesses in our national security.
Any questions in the audience?
Tim and Leslie, if the U.S. government is indeed holding craft from another intelligence, would it compromise national security to show that craft, to provide proof that we are indeed holding that?
I'll start. Thanks, Ralph. Yeah, that's debatable. You'll get a lot of intelligence experts saying definitely yes, because that might lead to some technology surprise, that other adversaries might launch into. But yeah, and I'm not necessarily pushing for. So the Schumer Amendment institutes a process called controlled disclosure, where a board will review elements of UAP from crash retrieval to just video to data and determine with very thoughtful deliberation, will this compromise national security or conversely, might it benefit society? And then if the board is sufficiently erudite, that maybe they will actually arrive at the right answer and recommend it to the president. And so that's kind of my position, is that I think that act should be passed, and that I can't answer that, but we should have some experts evaluate based on those criteria and then determine if that's the case. And that would also require an understanding of whatever given craft or technology they're going to explore, examine, or assess. It might be something that has some really game-changing stuff. I haven't seen the craft. I know people who have information about those, where they are, et cetera. Can't say much more, but again, it would just require knowing, okay, is this something that might be so transformational we don't want China to know, for example, or is it something that this could really benefit society? And that's the sort of playoff that has to happen.
Yeah, I mean, the other factor is that China has its own craft, apparently. Russia possibly also. And so there's a concern that there's some kind of sort of a race going on among these different nations to try to back engineer these craft and figure out how the technology works. And whoever gets that understanding first has a lot of power. I mean, the technology is so unbelievable that you would basically control the world. So it all has to be balanced with, is China going to come out first? Are we going to come out first? What shall we do to try to keep it at bay? And I understand why we don't want to challenge that too much. And I think Tim's right that we need to have a gradual unveiling of things. But Ralph, we could have maybe they could release a piece of something. If not a whole craft, but just a piece of that craft that scientists could verify were somehow not made by human hands, as has been said. If that could be verified with a smaller amount of the material, and therefore we wouldn't really be giving anything away. But I don't know if that's ever going to happen.
That's a great answer, Leslie. And by the way, Gary Nolan, Soul Foundation co-founder, has he's written an academic paper on materials obtained allegedly from a... Yeah, that's right. And so how about the government just going out and saying, this is real? That would not compromise a thing. He's published this academically. That'd be a great first step.
Isn't it better than Roswell stories that we get from National Enquirer?
The media.
Isn't what better? Just to tell the truth, because we're all hovering over Roswell stories. So.
Right. I think this is what we tried to do at the hearing, is that the government should be forthright and transparent to the fullest extent possible with respect to national security, and they've not been. And in fact, the biggest issue is not sharing it with Congress. This is their error. And I was in the government, so I'm out because I've seen inefficiency and cover-up. I've been witness to this. So let's hear a personal story, okay? So one of the these things are under special access programs that are only allowed to be, only a small number of people are rightly allowed to know about, which is good. I think that's a good process, okay? But, for example, I had sailors that were using data from very tricky sensors under special access programs, and it was helping them to do their jobs, being weather and ocean forecasters. And here I am, I'm an admiral in charge of them, and I want to make sure they're doing their jobs well, and maybe they need more of that data. You know, I set the policies in place to make sure they have what they need to do their jobs. So I asked, I'd like to be read in that program. I want to know it better to help them do their jobs better. Oh no, sir, you don't have a need to know. Only the operators have the need to know. You don't. So here I am getting shut out by some GS-14, and I'm a 1-star. You know, and that's what happened. And this is exactly what's happening with the UAP thing. Oh no, you can't know this, you know, and there's other things going on here too, but it's this, I've seen it. And that's why I'm speaking out. This is the government not working well, not working in the public's best interest, and also not operating efficiently and effectively.
Actually, it's illegal to withhold the knowledge of these programs from Congress. So the reason the oversight committees have been having hearings is because the whistleblowers are saying that this illegal activities are going on here, because the Congress is supposed to have oversight of all of these programs, is supposed to know about these programs, and it's all been kept from them. And that's against the law. So that's a lot of what why the Congress is concerned.
Right, and just to finish this, there's a thing called separation of powers, and the Congress's oversight authority is being undermined, and that is not good. I think, and that's what we spoke about at the hearing.
I've heard you speak this evening several times. Now it seems to be common knowledge that there are craft that have been recovered. There are divisions or agencies to do that. I would assume there are at least 3, United States, China, Russia, from what you've said. How many do you estimate that there might be? 100, 1,000, 6 recovered craft?
Priscilla?
Yes?
I don't know.
At all?
I know
Are
the
you
people.
telling me the truth?
I know the people that know, and go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, Dave Grush has said, I think, around 20. I mean, he can't be very specific, but it's not a small number. And multiple people have told me that. It's not a small number, and it goes all the way back to before the 1940s. In fact, he talked publicly about this crash in 1933 in Italy. So, there's been a lot of time, and there's been a lot of recoveries, apparently.
Please wait for the microphone.
See, those are the kinds of things we're not told. We're not told any of the specific information about the craft. We know, unless we have classified access to information like he does. So I'm going to pass it over to him.
I may.
Right. So this is interesting because this is the nature of this current narrative conversation, is that we're having these whistleblowers come out, and they're taking insane risks, and they're saying what they can say without getting thrown in jail, and so they can only say a few things. And so I know this only from people like Dave Grush, and others. It's not just him. There's others, and they're very credible, and they say what they can say, and they don't share more. And we don't press them to say more because we respect the risk they're taking. So I don't know, but I am 100% certain they're accurate, true, valid. I know these professionals. I work in their agencies. I know how things work, and so that's all we can tell you right now. And how big they are, and there's all these reports out there, mile-long craft, and all this. Don't know. I just don't know. But they're real. And Lou got up there in front of Congress and said they're real. And I know from my sources that are very credible that they're real.
I have a question here. So I note the timing, which is either coincidental or maybe on purpose, that you were here tonight only a week after you testified in front of Congress. And about a year ago at Christmas time, I welcomed Ryan Graves as a guest here for the holiday party. So it might not be the first time that the discussions happened in this room, but certainly perhaps the loudest time. And so I wonder specifically for the Explorers Club audience, what your motivations are telling this story to us, and is there something that you hope that this community can do by you being here tonight?
Thanks. What's your name?
Nick Orenstein.
Thank you, Nick. I'm so glad you asked that question, because when Richard got up and introduced us, he talked about these 3 eras. And the 3rd era was very much relevant to my former job at NOAA about protecting things, the environment, conservation. That was our big mission, science-based, and I like that. But there's a new era, and I don't even know how to characterize it. It's a new understanding of reality, the cosmos, our place in it, that we're seeing, and explorers all can contribute in different ways. We're a very science-based club and a discovery-focused club, and there is a whole lot of science and discovery awaiting us that we have never really imagined, and that's what I encourage you all to promote, discuss, advocate for, and support.
Thank you.
I've interviewed and know people who've had experiences. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Did I steal somebody? Sorry. Oh my. Okay. So I know people who have had experiences, intimate experiences, and they have had effects. And you talk about the biological effects of just observing. These scientists who have been close up, seen them close up, have they had a change in their systems? Clearly in their minds. But what have you observed, or what have they observed? Has their life changed besides becoming whistleblowers?
What's your name?
Nancy.
Nancy, that's a great question. So Nancy asked if there's what if I know about potential life changes physically or psychologically and biologically of these experiences. And there's a lot out there on this, but I can tell you this. So Jay Stratton, head of the U.S. government's UAP task force. There are 2 books out there by his boss, or first boss, colleagues, I'll say that. One's called Skinwalkers of the Pentagon, and the other one is The Hunt for Skinwalker Ranch. Sorry. And these are not wacko, sensational books. These are by the authorities in the Pentagon that were in the programs. And what they document is biological effects and psychological effects of the phenomena. And I'll just leave it at that. I'm not an authority on this. But what people like Jacques Vallée, who studied this for 5 decades, will attest to is that the phenomena are just not only physical. And there's an interaction, not all the time, but it occurs. And that's just part of the thing we should be researching more. But it's real. It is absolutely real, and I won't discount it. And people like Jay, who is in charge of the Pentagon program, he does not discount it, and he actually was a witness to it.
In those books, and in Lou Elizondo's book, Imminent, as well, he writes about orbs, which are like basketball size or maybe smaller. Sort of these lights, they're round spheres. It's almost, maybe they're physical, maybe they're not, but they can really cause biological effects on people. And there was one case in which one of these orbs went through the body of an individual who was driving a car, and his daughter was with him. And he had severe blood disorders and was seriously ill from this encounter. That was as close as you can get. But some of these orbs can cause problems. And one of the things that scientists can learn by studying the people who are impacted is by looking at what's caused the harm, they can learn something about the nature of the phenomenon that caused it. Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's a whole other thing. Yeah, that's a whole. Anyway, I just kind of lost my train of thought. But there is an individual named a man named Dr. Kit Green, who has spent decades working with. He's a medical doctor, working on behalf of the government, helping people who are injured by these encounters with UAP. And we also mentioned Jim Semivan earlier, who had an encounter in which he there was there was like a mark on the back of his neck, and there was some punch by, yeah, I don't know if he's talked about that publicly or not, but anyway, he has. And so, that was caused by something. It wasn't there before the event. His wife had issues with nosebleeds and all kinds of stuff. And this was taken on by the government and studied by a numerous team of doctors. So it's a really important area. It also, it proves the reality of the phenomenon, and it's actually affecting people, but it also helps us learn more about what is it that's causing these problems for people.
Question right here.
Oh, yes. It occurred to me that, we have this unbelievable veil of secrecy. You have legitimate security needs. You have an entrenched defense bureaucracy, people protecting fiefdoms by not releasing info. What if we circumvent this by delving into what other nations who are relatively friendly to us, what they've recovered, what they've seen, et cetera, et cetera?
Well, yeah. Thank you. What's your name? Aaron? Thanks. Great question. Actually, tomorrow, me and Leslie are getting on a plane early to go to this Sol Foundation Symposium, the second inaugural one, to discuss this whole topic. And my presentation is on a potential UAP policy for the U.S. And that has to be an essential part of it. In my work at NOAA, things like fisheries and climate change, greenhouse gases, there's no international borders, right? So the same here, right? So that absolutely has to be a part of it. Now, I'm not privy to what I know we've heard that there's some international agreements that have existed, like with Russia, but ultimately, yes, going forward, we really believe that has to happen, and we're going to advocate for that. I do not know if the current Aero office has talked about that, international cooperation. Broadly. We have a lot of international agreements in the DoD, for sure. But, yeah, so Aaron, great point. We, as advocates for disclosure, transparency, and research, absolutely agree that international collaboration has to be a part of it.
Plenty of hands up. Felix, did you have the microphone?
Before you get to that person, I want to give my hero friend Will, former Navy SEAL, colleague, sir, I want to answer your question. No, seriously.
Thank you, Tim. I'm a little older, so I go back to Roswell and all the hoopla about that. I just wonder if you could share personally, not officially, just personally, what do you think about life forms on any of these UFOs?
That's a great question, Will. Thank you. Will Tower, a former UDT Navy SEAL and hero from Vietnam. Please give him a round of applause. It's a great question because we don't really know, and we're here. Some of this knowledge is, again, trapped under the government secrecy, but I think it's here's how I answer that question in different settings. Like you, my wife and I, we love to scuba dive. And we just went to the Galapagos Islands in November. And the diversity of life there, as Darwin documented, is extraordinary. And why would there not be a diversity of non-human advanced intelligence life throughout the universe in all sorts of forms? And we see it. We see, I can't explain it, again, but there's a variety of different type of reports of physical types of non-human humanoid types. And then there's these intelligences that are sort of not even orbs and whatever. What are they? They're intelligently controlled. Are they craft? Are they entities? We just don't know is the answer. And you know, Avril Haines, Director of National Intelligence, even in a report said, we don't know. So we can speculate, and there might be people and contractors who have possession of biologics. We think that's what Dave Brush testified to, that give us an inkling to what might be known. I don't know, but when I dive on a coral reef and I see the insane diversity of fish and animals, I think, well, why not in the universe? And I think, and that's what's so exciting. And really intrigues my imagination.
If I may say something, though, somebody like me who's been studying this thing for over 50 years, one thing that strikes me is, number one, as far as the size of the craft, that I think you asked a question a little bit earlier, you know, usually they're reported to be between, let's say, 7, 8 feet, like the orbs, right? And then 30, 40 feet for a typical flying saucer or something like that. Typically, it's been that. And it strikes me that, well, it's kind of the size of a car or a truck, you know, maybe a small airplane. So there's something that kind of relates to our world, right? It's the size that would accommodate a being about like ourselves, right? That's very strange. And then when people report having seen or encountered creatures, beings, they're humanoids in 90 or 95% of the time. It's not octopus or, you know, we were taught maybe a long time ago, if there are aliens, they would look like very, very strange, right? That tentacles with an eye at the end. Well, no, they're reported to have 2 arms, 2 legs, 2 eyes, maybe a little nose, and it's consistent. It's consistent. And so that doesn't say anything except that it's very mysterious why that would be the case, right?
Yeah, and just to add, just to what Tim was saying, that David Grush did testify under oath before Congress in the open hearing that there have been bodies recovered, and he's not the only one that has said that. I mean, it's really, I mean, when Ralph and I covered the story with David Grush, we didn't even want to go there with the body question. It's just so far out. But the Congress people, then David Grush did this video interview with Ross Coulthart in which he was asked about that. We tried to avoid it, but and then the members of Congress asked him about it. So he had to acknowledge it, but he couldn't say anything specific. And just so that you know, it does seem like there's a reality to that, and that other sources have confirmed it, although with no specifics. So we don't have answers to specific questions.
One back here.
Thank you. So we know that these sightings predate the atomic age, but could you speak a bit to your sense of why they increased so much during atomic testing, and maybe a bit more about the multidimensional aspect of all of this?
So who was asked a question? Isaac. Thanks, Isaac. Well, again, I don't know. I've read a lot. Lou's book, Imminent, has a great deal in this, which he knows firsthand because he's been working with people in the programs. But it just appears to be a couple things. One is now we have sensors that are way more accurate, so we're able to see things. Like Ryan Graves, when he was out in his exercise, he had a new advanced radar on his aircraft, and so they were seeing things they'd never seen before. The other aspect is that Robert Hastings has written a great book on this about UFOs and nukes, that we see a lot of activity around our nuclear capabilities, including aircraft carriers and sites with ICBMs, and there's some connection there, and so that might be a lead to an increase, and there's a whole area of study, thought, discourse on UFOs and nukes and nuke testing, and I won't go into those details, but and a lot of it seems very credible and plausible and has been talked about. And Luke addresses this in his book. So it might be that combination of more advanced sensors, increasing nuclear activity, which somehow interests the phenomena, and who knows what else. What do you think?
Yeah, because we don't really know their intentions. So even if they're seen, the other question that comes up, if they're reported a lot around these sensitive facilities like nuclear bases, but these people are looking out for them. I mean, they have their eyes on the skies intensely, and it doesn't necessarily mean they're showing up there more. It just might mean that we're hearing about them more because they're going to be noticed in those locations, and they're going to be of great concern as well.
Hello. I'm just curious if you're aware of any sort of plan, like on a global or national level, for like if these, non-human intelligence beings actually reveal themselves like more prominently. Is there a plan?
You mean a plan on how to deal with it if that happens, or a plan on their behalf?
Like a plan on how we, humanity, will deal with it.
Wow, what a great question. I don't think there is a plan, but let me hand it over to Tim.
So there is no plan. Well, there's no plan that's publicly released, and that's the point of the hearings we've had, is that the U.S. government's UAP policy is really not apparent. You have different parts of the government saying different things. Congress is fractured, by the way. You have the Senate and Schumer and Rounds wanting to disclose. You have the House Oversight Committee wanting to do the same. But then you have people who blocked it, like Representative Turner and Rogers. So there's that. Then you have the executive branch, where they've acknowledged in some way the validity of UAP. For example, Jay Stratton getting this National Meritorious Unit Award for Intelligence by Avril Haines, the Director of National Intelligence, but going out and not really releasing what we know about UAP and discounting certain things by the DoD's Aero UAP office. There's a lot there. So right now, the U.S. UAP policy and approach and plan is fractured and really non-existent, and it's just being stovepiped into one office, this Aero, and they're just reporting one-off cases. They're not looking at the broader issue. And I'll just say, what's your name? Your first name? Nico. We're going to post, the Soul Foundation is going to post videos of all our presentations next week, tomorrow, next day, Friday, and I'm giving a talk on what I think the U.S. government's plan should be, and so check it out and let me know what you think. Thanks. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Anna, and I am the lead USO researcher for the Scientific Coalition of UAP Studies. Thank you. As citizen scientists, we have limited resources, limited data sets. I can't go out and interview people. I can't go out into Catalina Island every other day and do on-the-field research. What avenues would you suggest that we key in on and investigate for future research? Again, with limited online data sets that we're using or in-person investigations.
What's your last name, Anna? Which last name? Kobach. Okay, good. Thank you. Sorry. I'll remember you now. That's a good question, and I think that I'm trying at a national level to get all the organizations, so USOs, let's just talk about USOs, but the same applies for UAP, that the research enterprise of the United States involved, and it's not an easy sell. Okay, I'm a member of the National Academy's Ocean Studies Board. This is crazy. I can't even believe I did this. I went, and there was a discussion we had. The Ocean Studies Board of the National Academies looks at ocean issues, and they have a study agenda every year. Okay, and this is like the Ocean Hall of Fame. Okay, these are all leading scientists across universities and whatnot. And okay, next, what's our research agenda going to be? A study plan for the next year. And everybody's talking about ocean plastics and really important issues that matter. And I teed up UAP, undersea UAP, and I just basically, my bottom line was, look, these things are in the ocean. We don't understand their intent, their nature, etc. It could be, world-changing. You as a board should just know it. And if you want to come up with a research agenda topic, happy to help you and inform you. And they all took it on board, and they were scared as hell. So, Roger, and I expected that, but I did it. So my point is, this is going to be a kind of a long road for us, and that we need to get the national enterprise interested in terms of research, and then we have to work on, then that drives university funding, okay, and then in research institutes and the private sector. So, for example, what I want to do, my goal is to go, and I've done this, get the White House in their Ocean Science and Technology Policy Office, the White House Science and Technology Office, to put in their annual research and development priorities memo. They do this. Here's what we want to do. When I was at NOAA, I made sure they put in that memo ocean mapping and exploration, because I think that was important. I can talk about that later. But then we got that in there. Now I think we should talk about UAP. We should look at the UAP research and get that to be an open research priority for the nation, so that rather than have in the undersea world, we just go look at maybe just biology and plastics. Let's just add maybe UAP to the target set so that all this research funding and effort just doesn't discount that and throw that away as noise. Because possibly we're finding a lot of things and we just throw it out because we think, oh, it's anomalous. Don't know what that is. And that's where I'm going. So it's a big question you just asked. And I think it has to start at the top, but then there's grassroots efforts too, and I'm working with people in the FBI and you name it, Galileo Project, like I said, at Harvard. So I think it's going to be a bottom-up and a top-down effort. Hope that wasn't too much for you.
I think we have time for just one more question. So the lady here, blue? Right here. Oh, over there.
Well, I still am a bit skeptical. It's one thing to say that there are, credible reports on unexplained aerial phenomena that are out there, and I think they should be studied in greater detail. I'm fine with that, but I think it is far too premature at this point of our incomplete knowledge to jump to the conclusion that these represent alien spacecraft from some extraterrestrial civilization way out in space. And the other thing is, have you ever found any evidence of physical objects or things that cannot be explained in terms of the technology that we have today? Actual, not just sightings in the air or under ocean, but actual objects or relics or, physical items.
What's your name?
Vivian.
Vivian, that's a great question. I agree wholeheartedly. Until we kind of get an actual UFO in front of the public that they can touch, who's to say if it's real or not? I'm just telling you that I'm a government person who knows government people who are in the program. True. Valid. Can't dispute that. And I'd like that you're focused on evidence. However, there are things. So like the video of the Navy pilots cursing out this thing, UFO, was absolutely 100% real. So what do you say? What caused that? That wasn't a weather balloon. I'm telling you right now, there were many of them out there, and they were going to shut down the exercise. So I don't know if that's evidence enough for you. But then there's people like Gary Nolan who studied materials that, and here's what he gathered, these materials from an alleged UFO crash, or it was debris from a UFO, basically. He studied this, and it was material that had been engineered through industrial processes, creating isotope relationships compounds that don't exist on this Earth, and he can't explain how they were made. So there's evidence is coming in, okay? So we're not quite there yet, I guess, maybe to meet your standard, Vivian, which I respect. But I've seen enough, and I'm just telling you that. That's why I'm speaking here. So, but great. Let's move this forward. Thank you.
I think we are running out of time. I want to say that whatever we have heard tonight, Leslie and Tim, this a paradigm shift is taking place in terms of the public discourse about UFOs, UAP, and even non-human intelligence. And we thank you for being here tonight, for your powerful, great presentations. And thank you, and thank you for the to the Explorers Club for hosting again. Thank you, and to.
How about that? Sure.